There you go. Hi guys, my name is Isaac Grifflin, and today I will be talking to you about the Monroe Doctrine and its effects, and also how it's evolved over time. So to outline my presentation, I'll be giving background on the original Monroe Doctrine and its effects in America, and also its effects in Latin America and Europe. And then I will also talk about the two that one is a revision of the Monroe Doctrine, and the second one is a completely new document, but they are based off of the Monroe Doctrine. So some basic background. The Monroe Doctrine was created in 1823. It was never its actual own document, but rather a speech given by President James Monroe to Congress. The document stated that European nations must stay out of the Western Hemisphere's affairs, and that Europe could no longer colonize in any of the Americas. And I got that from ourdocuments.gov. So, effects in the United States. The effects were not immediate, but the document would solidify the U.S. as the dominant power in the West. Some examples of how the Monroe Doctrine was used was in 1842, the U.S. would use it to annex Hawaii, and it would keep Britain out of Hawaii. And in 1868, it would help the U.S. claim Alaska for themselves instead of letting Russia claim it. The Monroe Doctrine did not just have an impact on America, but it also had an impact in Latin America. Latin American countries began to revolt against the European nations that were controlling them, and this caught America's eye because it kind of reminded themselves of how they overthrew Britain in their own country. So they gained the support of the U.S. through this. A European group known as the Holy Alliance, which was made up of Austria, Prussia, and Russia, tried to return these Latin American countries back to their mother country, which was Spain. Now, the U.S. didn't worry about this too much because they knew that Britain was protecting the ports, because if they let these European nations take over these countries, they would lose their trade. So they didn't have to worry too much, but the U.S. did act quickly. John Quincy Adams was able to convince President Monroe to add this portion to the doctrine, and that was for the U.S. to act separately and say that any attack on these new countries would be an attack on America as well. So going into the evolution of the Monroe Doctrine, it's the Roosevelt Corollary. In 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt would make the first changes to the Monroe Doctrine. In a State of the Union address, Roosevelt would change the mindset of America from an isolationist mindset to somewhat of an imperialist mindset. These changes were made because of a crisis in Venezuela, where Italy, Britain, and Germany sent ships to blockade the ports in Venezuela. So Roosevelt's change was that the U.S. now had not only the power to say don't come in here, but they had the responsibility to protect the countries in the Western Hemisphere. Because this attack made the U.S. feel that their power in the West was undermined, so they wanted to make sure that the world knew that we were in control of this side of the world. And the second add-on evolution of the Monroe Doctrine is the Bush Doctrine. Now, that's not its official title. It was officially called the National Security Strategy of the United States of America. Bush Doctrine is a lot easier, so we're just going to use that. It was created in 2001 after the tragic 9/11 attacks, and there were three main points to this new strategy. It was preemption, act alone, and extend freedom. And preemption is the idea that in the world of terrorist groups, the U.S. may need to act first. They may need to be the first ones to attack. The second point, act alone, it explains itself. If necessary, the U.S. will be willing to go in and act alone. They would prefer working with other groups such as the United Nations to stop these terrorist groups, but if need be, they would be willing to go attack themselves. And the third point, extending freedom. It's pretty much saying that they want to extend Western ideals around the world. So, like some of these would be rule of law, freedom of religion, and respect for women. And although this idea is good, it had some backlash because a lot of people were like, that's a lot to ask, because it took our country hundreds of years just to get it here, so it's going to take a while to get it everywhere else. In conclusion, since 1823, the Monroe Doctrine has helped the U.S. and many other countries protect their own land. The U.S. was able to gain land, and Latin America was able to keep their land and freedom. The Monroe Doctrine has solidified the U.S. as the main power in the West, and the changes made to it has only increased our power in the world. Here are my sources. Any questions?